streaming. So I want to use Y. Oh, did I see you can download a Braille-ready format? How do you... There must be a specific machine you can download it to. Because otherwise, that would just be strange. No, stop that. There we go. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So those are a lot of words that you're not going to want a lot of vagueness about. You're going to want to know what a free society is. You're going to want to know what democratic means. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. Freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. You'll often hear, especially on TV shows, since a lot of our media comes from the States, talk about, separation of church and state, and we have no such clause. What we have is our fundamental freedom of conscience and religion. And that includes, of course, the freedom not to have a particular religion. A particular court case actually decided that. And so these do have vagueness about them. And if you think it's vague and you think it's wrong, who do you take that to? If you were like, Brownwood College is making me wear a uniform, that is a violation of my fundamental freedom here, my freedom of expression. Who do you sue? Pardon? No, well, kind of. You could. You say you're violating my freedom of expression, but where do you take it to? And you go to Mr. Patel, and it's like, you're wrong. And he says, no, I'm not. It's not a trick question. Yeah?
Like, would you take it so you can get it, changed in the charter?
Yeah. Yeah.
You take it to your MP?
You take it to your MP. Only the MPs can actually change law. If you take it to the courts, they can strike it down. They can't make new law. So they could say, this does violate the freedom of expression. All private schools must now not require a dress code. And they can say that that is something that they must do. Now, would it actually work? No, because we're a private school and you choose to come here. So they would say your freedom of expression is freely intact. You don't have to come here. But if they did that at a public school, they might have a bit more of a case, which is why many public schools don't necessarily have the same types of things as a private school. Private schools, we could make you go to the freedom of religion is a big one. Freedom of conscience and religion. We can make you go to church, and we get to pick the church. We could decide tomorrow, we're all Buddhist. We're going to go to Buddhist church on Tuesdays. Because in my particular version of Buddhism, that is the most holy day. And then you would have to go. And you'd say it's freedom of religion, and they'd say, well, you don't have to come here. We're actually really weird in that we're one of the very, very few private schools that don't actually make you go to a particular religious institution. Shawnigan has church every Saturday, I believe, in the morning. How many of you know anybody who goes to Shawnigan? How long is their church service, and when is it?
It's every Saturday for like an hour and 15 minutes.
Hour and 15 minutes. Is it before classes or after classes, or do they have classes?
They don't have class now.
Yeah,
They don't have class. They have church and sport then, I'm guessing.
But their church is also kind of like assembly.
Right.
So like they go to church and they sing and stuff like that, but they also do announcements at the
Oh,
same time.
so it takes over. It would take away some assembly time. Net advantage, perhaps. Do they have assembly during the week?
I don't know.
Don't know. Okay. So yeah, and they get to do that because they're private. But if they were public, that would be far more difficult. You are public. You're being paid through public funds. You are now forcing public people to have a particular religion or conscience. That is a protected fundamental freedom. Or is it? You would go to court because they could turn around and say, but we want our students to have ethics. And we have decided that this particular church is the best at teaching ethics, and this is demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. That's how the public school would protect itself. And then it would go to court, and the court would decide. And only thing the court can say is that you're wrong, and you can't do that anymore. They can't say this is what you do in the future, because Canadian judges are not elected, and since they're not elected, they cannot make law. In the U.S., judges are elected, and they can make law. So they can say, in the future, you do this, until some lawmaker changes it. In Canada, they just strike things down. And then they have to get together. One of the reasons why Canada doesn't have an abortion law is because it was struck down, and every politician has gone, I'm not touching that. Very, very many people will be angry at me when I touch that. So some of the ones, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. This is one of the really important ones, because they say this, and that's not very vague. When we say everyone, who do we mean? Everyone. That doesn't say Canadian citizens. That doesn't say people who have never been to jail. That doesn't say people who are not committing crimes. That says everyone. So in our particular version of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, everyone must be afforded these rights. Now, you can say in the situation like, well, we're going to deprive you of your right to liberty because you now have been convicted of a crime and your situation is different. So that's in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. But only for that crime and only because of that. If you are doing something else, it may not matter. There was a particular court case that went. I wasn't in court, but tangentially involved. And this is when a person was searched crossing the border, and they found heroin in the trunk. This is right across the U.S.-Canada border through Victoria. I used to hear a sound, and when I was living in Victoria, it would be a long horn. I'm like, what is that? And a friend of mine who was part of the border security for Canada would be like, oh, those are the drugs coming in. I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, on Tuesdays at this time is when all the drugs come in. And we're like, you know that? And they're like, yeah, of course we know that, because then you see the drugs on the street over the next week. But I'm like, if you know they're coming in, and you know it's that ferry from the States, why don't you stop it? They're like, well, we can't search every car. We also can't just go in there and say, you look guilty, so we're going to search your car. You have to have a reason. Merely the fact that they show up is not reason enough. Everybody has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. And of course, if you're dealing drugs, the person bringing the drugs is going to be a minivan with a couple with no tattoos or anything that looks odd, and probably a child in a car seat. That's the one that's probably going to be on, and you have no reason to search that vehicle, other than the fact that that would be a really good a way to smuggle drugs into the country. Even criminals have rights until they're caught, because not everybody is a criminal. If criminals don't have rights before they're caught, then nobody has rights, because everybody's a criminal that hasn't been caught yet in the eyes of somebody. And so this particular court case, they did search this gentleman's vehicle. They did find heroin. He is absolutely guilty. The court case was not about the fact that he was guilty. He was going to jail no matter the outcome of this court case for a lot of different reasons. But the court case was whether or not the RCMP had a reason to search the car. Because you have to have a prior reason to search the car. You can't just walk up and go, I think you look suspicious. You have to be like, something's off. I saw drug paraphernalia in the back. I smelled marijuana. There has to be a legal reason that they can stop you. Yeah. Sure.
I saw something, but
And at that point that you make something up, that will go to court. And now you have to defend what you made up. So I saw drug paraphernalia in the back.
no one can ever prove it. If I say I smelled something, no one can ever prove it.
Can't there have been other people there at the time?
You have, first of all, the testimony of the person who's being accused. Now, sure, there may be heroin in the back, but he said he smelled marijuana. That's great, because the person who's in there can show, given how long it lasts, I didn't have marijuana in my system. The person's reason for searching my vehicle was made up. The police officer is still in trouble. They made up a reason. And sure, they made up a reason and caught that person, but they probably also then made up a reason for many other innocent people and searched their vehicles. One of the reasons we're worried now, especially nowadays, it's come up in the last 5-6 years about abuses of police power, is it's not when they're right that we're worried about. It's all the times they were wrong and they abused their power and trust and accused people and searched their vehicles and did things that they shouldn't have done with people who weren't guilty of anything over and over and over again. So yeah, you can make some up, but you also will have to defend that in court. So was there a reasonable reason to smell marijuana? Now, if it turns out they test him afterwards and he tests positive for marijuana, yeah. And he may have made it up. He tests positive because he smoked it the night before, but now his case becomes weaker. Also, just generally, we should all hold true to the fact that cops shouldn't lie and do that. We want to catch those people and make sure they don't become police officers. It's a constant struggle. We give people power, and then we want to make sure that they're not abusing it. But yeah, anybody can make stuff up. I did have an uncle who's a police officer, and I did ask him, like, do you ever work? He was in accident investigation, so he wasn't actually in any criminal areas other than if someone criminally crashed a car. But I did ask him, do you ever worry, like, if you arrest the wrong person? And he was like, no. Everybody's guilty of something. If we convict them on a crime they weren't guilty of, you know they did something. I'm like, what? He was like, you've done something that you should be arrested for. And I'm like, and then you think of all, you stole a chocolate bar when you were 6 years old. You've done something in your life. And anybody here think they're completely innocent? I saw a couple of nods and a couple of people looking kind of worried. So, maybe some of you are. Obviously, that's a terrible principle to have. He was mostly joking. Also indicated the kind of attitude that you kind of get when you see people at their worst every day, I think. But there is this balance, fundamental justice with it. So, convicted of a crime, now you are deprived of your liberty. We've gone through this a few times. Oop. I don't want my game force ready driver. Case 1 of the first principle of Section 7 to be qualified was when the charter, what the charter protected. Courts have extended the rights held in the charter to both those of citizens who are not within the jurisdiction of Canada and to those individuals in Canada who are not citizens. So it came up, what does everyone mean? And it came out, everyone means everyone. Canada is concerned about the life, liberty, and security of person of everybody on the planet. That is literally what our laws say. So when Canada does a condemnation of another country for its human rights violations, it is a reflection of our charter. We're supposed to. We're supposed to be concerned about these rights for everybody. The right for life debate. Is life a duty or is life a duty or a right? And that has gone through a number of things. So everybody has the right to life, liberty. And so the first one was, I think this is Sue Rodriguez. 1993, Rodriguez versus British Columbia. She had a debilitating disease in which at some point in her life she would be unable to move and in extreme pain. And she just knew that was coming. That was what she had. So she asked the courts to say, when I reach that point, I want a medical doctor to be allowed to help me die because I will be in pain and I don't want to live under those conditions. And sure, you can ask me again. She's still going to have all her awareness, but I won't be able to do it myself because I'm losing all my limbs and control over them. So I want to be able to help, some help. And the court ruled at the time that in the interests of justice and society, denied that the right to bodily control could trump the right to life and justify assisted suicide. They cited that it was a common societal belief that human life is sacred and inviolable. So they denied her that. She actually did die. Sven Robinson, I believe, and an unnamed medical doctor was apparently present when that happened. Sven Robinson is famous as one of the first LGBTQ MPs in Canada, openly so. Of course, we don't know about anybody who wasn't open. Got a little bit of trouble over that because it was at the time an illegal act. Now, this went on because people said, look, a right isn't a duty. And so this kept hitting the courts because a common societal belief is not necessarily the same as our laws. They don't necessarily trump. And so there's a weak point there. 2015, Carter versus Canada. The Supreme Court held the criminal code positions surrounding assisted dying were unconstitutional, and they violated Section 7 of the Charter. The court struck down the provision in the criminal code, and Canadian adults who are mentally competent and suffering intolerably and enduringly now have the right to a doctor's assistance in dying. Rights are not duties. Often I've heard this phrased by, if you're in the States, and they'll talk about Canada's terrible medical system, because nobody here gets care, and we have hospitals set up to kill people, and they refer to this because we now allow this in Canada. It's rhetoric, of course, and they debate a lot of health things, and that's one of their talking head points, balding men in a podcast type thing. But it didn't come about because of any political action. So I'll see it blamed like, oh, this political party wanted this to happen, and they wanted to kill old people because it'll save the government. Maybe, if we put in bad laws, certainly. But it wasn't brought about because of any political party. It was brought about because it is reflected in the words of the original charter that it's a right and not a duty. And so that doesn't have a lot of vagueness about it. Eventually that's going to fall. This one's a little... I mentioned the Abortion Act. It's R versus Morgentaler. Morgentaler would run around Canada in a little van performing abortions and essentially saying, I dare you to arrest me. So he was arrested multiple times. And then they would let him go because what they didn't want is they didn't want that to go to court, because if it got to the Supreme Court, they were suspicious it might be struck down. And of course, when it did go to court, it was struck down. 1988, which is relatively late compared to other countries, it was ruled that the existing law was unconstitutional because the abortion law violated a woman's right to life, liberty, and the security of person. It's a matter of consent, and so since it's a matter of consent, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. A more recent one, and this was a bit scandalous, so I do... but I like it. I like this particular example because it talks about a class of people that we don't always talk about well, particularly in criminal proceedings, and other members of society may look down upon. So prostitution law in Canada. Prostitution law in Canada was completely struck down at one point. Prostitution before that time was and kind of always has been legal, but how Canada dealt with it is that it made everything around it illegal. So although it was legal, any money that you used from it was illegal. Having a building in which those acts occurred was illegal. Living in a place in which those acts occurred was illegal. So everything around it was illegal. And what the court found is that despite the fact that this class of people are prostitutes and the law doesn't like them, they are still allowed the basic protections of life, liberty and security of person. And so in that case, your laws were actually making their lives much harder. They couldn't go to the police when they were assaulted. If there was a transaction and they were cheated, they couldn't go to the police. The police themselves were often those that were victimizing them. They were saying the laws themselves are actually creating such a huge danger that the provision that was always used for the defense, which was principles of fundamental justice in society, we can't have sexual exploitation. We're worried about this. We can't have sexual exploitation of children. We don't want people to feel that they have to be sexually exploited in order to participate in a capitalistic system. And so for the principles of fundamental justice, we're allowed to deprive people of the freedom of this. And the law looked at it and goes, the amount of harms your laws are creating outweighs the principles of justice in this case. So Canada, I think the judge said, I strike it down, but I give you like 2 years. They had to come up with a completely new set of laws that would protect people in that class, ostensibly. I have no idea where's the actual web page. I just got rid of it. I did like, however, this quote when I was reading it. The thing here is, politicians, though they may know us as clients, do not understand how sex work works. I remember when that happened in the hearings, because I was following the law as it would apply to this, and that was such a burn at the moment, because the person saying that looked directly at certain politicians while doing that, and kind of implied other things. Okay. Vagueness and ambiguity, discussing the laws because interpretation of those laws is important, and this is an ongoing thing. Most of the laws that govern you are not the laws as written. All of the laws that govern you are all of these things. So we make a law, you have the right to life, and then someone says, does that mean that I can't kill in self-defense? And then that goes to court, and the court says, of course you can kill in self-defense. And then someone says, but someone came on my porch and I was scared of them and then I shot them. Is that self-defense? And the court goes, no, you deprived them of life. You're not allowed to do that. So for example, in Canada, if someone's on your porch, you are not allowed to shoot them. In fact, if they are actively running at you and you are afraid of your life, you are not allowed to shoot them. In Canada, what do you have to do? Yeah? You have to run away. It's like, if you can run away, run away. It creates the most life for everybody. Let the police solve the police problems. Then you're allowed to engage in self-defense.
So when someone's running at you, just break a leg and then you pull your...
Sure. Or and I don't want to throw Hank under the bus, but Hank, who teaches jiu-jitsu, I have been gleefully told by Wilbur that he has told them that if you're fighting someone in real life and you're choking them out, pull their body on top of you so it looks like you were losing, so it's more likely that you'll have a successful defense. If you know jiu-jitsu and you are defending yourself against someone and you really hurt them badly, you can be at fault. Now, this is not just Canada. There's a famous case in the U.S. in which a gentleman he had a house that he wasn't living in, and teenagers and thieves kept breaking in and stealing stuff from him over and over and over again. He finally got tired of it. So he securely locked it up. He hammered boards over all the windows, and then he set traps. So if you walked into the house, you'd fall into the trap. You'd get a spike through your leg. There was a shotgun trap if you opened a particular door, so you'd get shot. And so at one point in time, a thief, and it wasn't like, again, it wasn't teenagers breaking the house looking for a place to drink. So it was someone who was absolutely no bones about it, was entering the house to steal stuff. They went in to get stuff to sell it. So they went into the house, they broke through the a floor, and they permanently injured the leg. I believe they had to have it amputated. It was like very bad. And the other leg was not too well either. They're in a wheelchair for the rest of their life. They were convicted of attempted theft because the homeowner was notified and they showed up to the house, and yes, he was trying to steal things. And then they appealed. He broke his leg, and the court was like, yeah, but you were trying to break in. And then a number of years later, the person is like, their leg is still going on. They're like, yeah, I tried to break into a house. I did serve jail time. But does that mean I'm a permanent invalid for the rest of my life? And they took that back to court, sued the original owners, and they won. Because permanently killing or damaging someone because of just money isn't a sufficient defense. If someone is breaking into your house and the only thing they're interested in doing is stealing stuff, you can't just shoot them. They have to be threatening your life. If you know jujitsu and an 8-year-old attacks you, you can't break their neck. You're not afraid of them. I mean, this is one of the pull their body on top of you isn't even going to work. Like, they're 8 years old. It's not going to look like you're in danger. So even American law, we hear more about this in America. They have more stand your ground type laws where you are kind of allowed to shoot them if you're on your front porch. But even they have a lot of common sense additions on that where you can't just do something. In Canada, that's stronger. If you're carrying a weapon for self-defense, that shows premeditation on your part to actively hurt someone. That counts against you. So you cannot carry bear mace in downtown Victoria because you're worried about muggers. You're not allowed to use chemical weapons. Violate all sorts of international laws. Yes.
What if they like surprise you and you hurt them by accident?
And that's fine. Yeah. And if you happen to have something, so like you can buy these really strong metal things to put on your keychains that can be used as almost a dagger. If you buy that, it shows premeditation. If you happen to carry a strong metal pen, that doesn't. But they're equally, in some cases, online YouTube reviews have shown more effective than some of the things that they can sell. But yeah, it's all about proportion in Canada. Hold it. Why did I even start that conversation? I went on to the next thing, and then it became about balance. I have forgotten my point, and I'm going to move on until I remember it again. Okay, next one. Notes. Yeah, back to notes. Haha. Ellis House won the 2020 track and field and are the best house. The best track and field players are therefore in Ellis House. I complain about Ellis House often enough that I felt I should acknowledge at some point in time.
Never complain about Alice House. Sure.
Really? Oh.
At least in this class.
What is the problem with this? If Ellis House won track and field, does that mean that the best track and field players are in Ellen House? Because there's a secret therefore there. Yes?
Like 2020 was like a while ago, so the runners could have graduated. It doesn't.
They could have. And that is a good point. That's a while ago. Those players could be gone. I often refer to Brentwood as like a river because in 4 years, nobody knows what happened. Your institutional memory is so short. You don't even know what prep snacks are, really. Like, you think you know what prep snacks are. You don't actually know what prep snacks are. There and then there. Yes?
Maybe in 2020 they were like improved or maybe better tricky food ones, but they were all sick. And so there are better ones in other towns, but we were just
Other houses could have missing members on the day. So they actually have the best ones, Mattson?
Yeah, kind of. This is like Alice could have this like the best average. Maybe they almost have someone decent in every event,
Oh, yeah.
but like other houses could just have someone like really good in large events.
Right.
It also assumes
Right. They could have all just had a bad day. Yeah. And that is the point. What's true of a team is not necessarily true of the members. The individual members could be anything. On track and field in 2020, the reason I bring this up, Ellis did win. Privet had the best members. Guess what was scheduled on the day of track and field in 2020? Pardon? Track and field. BC provincial track and field. So all our best members left to compete provincially, and then we had to compete in the school without anybody who knew track and field because all our members left. I'm not bitter about it at all. Yeah. Also, it could also be that, they're good individually, but maybe as a team or as a group, they don't get along. As everybody pointed out, all those reasons are good. What's true of the group is not necessarily true of the individuals. And making that assumption is known as the fallacy of division. Now, I've got a couple examples that show it really obviously. If the class average is 80%, then you cannot say that every member of the class got 80%. This is where stereotyping comes from and falls down. They're committing either one of these two fallacies. The fallacy of division is if you have a stat that say true, let's say we say that people like Mr. Neufeld, I'm going to make myself younger. It's a middle-aged, tall, white people with a lot of privilege, walk into stores and steal things all the time. Just pick up candy bars and walk out. That means we should only search middle-aged, white, 6 foot plus members of the public every time they walk into the store. It may be true of the group. I may have crime statistics to show that these kinds of people are more guilty of that type of crime. But the law applies to individuals, not groups. And just because it applies to the group doesn't mean that it applies to individual members. And you must treat, by law, individual members with the same rights of life, security of person, and all those particular rights. And so laws that treat people as groups are inherently unethical for that reason. They are applying the fallacy of division, even if it's true. It's also often not true, or they're looking at different causes. I always like the ones where they say, this particular group has a higher crime rate, therefore it should be, we obviously should, select that particular group, whether it's an airport security and people who look a certain way or anything. And then you point out, well, yes, but those neighborhoods are also policed more, so there are more people that are caught. Maybe if we inspected more other neighborhoods, we would put as many police there, we'd see as many infractions. It's weird that there was one famous case where a person was pointing out that between two schools, one school had the highest number of arrests and the other school had 0 for the students. And that's because in the school with the highest number of arrests had police officers assigned to it that patrolled it every day in the hallways, whereas the other school did not. Sure, it may be in a higher crime area, but if you don't have any police officers, you're not going to have any arrests. A Boeing 747 can fly unaided across the ocean. Therefore, just one of its parts can fly unaided across the ocean. So these, hopefully, 2 very obvious examples that you can think of when you're talking about the fallacy of division. What's true of the whole is not necessarily true of the parts. That doesn't mean it can't be. If you said, well, it's true of the whole, therefore it can't be true of the parts, that is also false. You can have an class average of 80% when everybody gets 80%. It's just that you can't conclude that that is obviously the case. Fallacy division are often conclusions from the variety of isms, sexism, racism. I believe this thing about the group, therefore I will apply this thing to individual members. Mr. Neufeld, Brentwood College School, was on television with Rick Mercer. Retired now. I don't think Rick Mercer's on television anymore. Mr. Neufeld is a part of Brentwood College School and was therefore also on television with his good friend. Rick Mercer. Do you know who Rick Mercer is? About time we got introduced to Rick Mercer. It's only like, I was going to say 2 minutes, but it turns out it's 6 minutes long. Hold up this, turn off the tablet, stop the sound. Sound back on. So, now that you've seen it, was I anywhere in there? No, the most famous teacher at Brentwood College School. They didn't include me at all. Admittedly, probably because I've only rowed once in my life.
Did you flip?
Actually, I didn't actually row. You know how we hire students out for service day? We used to not hire them for chores, but I used to hire them for skills. So we hired a student. We said, like, paint a picture, and then they would use all their art skills. I made a picture of Wilbur, actually. And then we hired one and said, teach us how to row. So we went down to the tank, and we learned to row. And we were so bad, he wouldn't let us onto the water. It was a beautiful little moment because I and Ms. Hedquist, who was in on this, were swearing so loudly. It was echoing in the tank. And then Mr. Alpress came by with a school tour. And we just sort of looked at each other, and then he took everybody away immediately without talking. Because I will say that whole, like, you've got to, like, have your hands here and then pull it back, and then they have to be in the right position, and then your back has to be in the right position.
Yeah.
And it was like, I would have to, like, do 4 things, and I could only do 3 of them at a time. And when I did the 4th thing, I'd stop doing the first thing. It was too hard.
Yeah.
Too hard.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah. So... Also, I think I can get this without copyright because it's Brentwood. I don't think how much time do we have left? Yeah, we don't want to see this one. There's only well, you can recognize some old. So Mr. McCarthy retired, but he was here. There's Mr. Gage. Do you see me anywhere? I am in here somewhere.
My dad and I.
This is so old that I'm assuming most of these people you won't even recognize. Mr. Cowie never ages. You will see Mr. Wismer 7 times. He is in the back dancing his little heart out. Mr. Collis in the background. Mr. Norman, of course. That was Mr. Norman without a beard. Mr. Collis. Miss Decker was there. I don't know if you noticed her. The man in the purple shirt there. That's Mrs. Flynn, the old head of Mackenzie House, if you have heard of her. That's Mr. Garvey. We used to have Mr. Sullivan's job. Of course, he never ages. That's Mrs. Decker on the right, if you didn't recognize her. Nurse Decker. Mr. Norman again. Now, to answer your question, did you see your dad?
Maybe.
Knowing your dad, what do you think he did?
He played Sid in the back.
That's a very good guess. I am in the back, marking very carefully, not dancing. Your dad took one look at what was going on and was like, I am out of here, and just left the entire time. I envied him because I didn't quite know what was going on, so I stayed and continued marking, and then I was trapped, surrounded by dancing people. It was very annoying.
Wait,
Hold it.
Mr. Newcomb, what did you do at the Brentwood Christmas party a couple of years ago?
The Brentwood Christmas party?
Yeah.
The speech?
No.
I didn't dance.
I heard you were playing Sid.
Oh, I played Civ, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely did that.
Or was it Brad? Was that Brad? Or was it
I also do it at grad. Yeah, I set up and play. So a little bit of history to go with the school and the Fallacy Division. And you have now, you can say you've seen the old Ross building.